This week's 1044 is brought to you by Chevron Delos 600 ADF Ultra Low Ash Diesel Engine Oil. It's time to kick some ash.
The sunsetting of 3G networks is set to begin in February 2022. How will fleets be impacted?
Hey everybody, and welcome to the 1044, a weekly webisode from the editors here at CCJ. I'm Jason Cannon, and my co-host on the other side is Matt Cole. The shutdown of 3G networks by cell companies has been talked about for a couple of years, but beginning in February, the process is going to begin as AT&T starts bringing down their 3G network. That'll be followed by T-Mobile in April and Verizon by the end of 2022.
Most people won't notice any changes, but the sunsetting of 3G could have a significant impact on the trucking industry. Many early ELD devices are tied to the 3G network, and once those go down, any carriers still using those devices will find themselves out of compliance with the ELD mandate. Other telematics will also be impacted if not upgraded to a 4G or newer device. I spoke with Michael Bloom, Vice President of Product for video telematics provider SmartWitness, about what the 3G shutdown could mean for fleets.
This is a really big issue, so I'm glad you guys are talking about this. From my perspective, it's kind of like, at this point, sirens should be going on in people's heads, because what's going to happen is, starting, as you said, February, the end of February next year, AT&T is going to be what we call sunsetting their 3G network. That basically means they're going to discontinue it and support of it. And this is very common. This is not, unusual. This happened with 1G and 2G, and the G stands for generation. So first generation network, second generation, third generation, where now 5G has come out. And I'm sure everybody's even starting planning and working on 6G, right, for the future. And each time the networks come out, there is dramatic improvements, right, in terms of functionality, usability, speed, width of the data pipe, if you will. So there's dramatic benefit to users of that. But what this means is that this is going to have a major impact on anybody who has a 3G device in their vehicle that's depending on it to do their business, right? So that includes something like the black box for the tracking device for telematics. That could include cameras that you have for the video telematics. That could include ELD devices that you're using. Anything that has a connectivity to a cellular connection is going to be affected if it's 3G. And the way this is going to happen is the rollout in terms of the sunsetting. It doesn't happen all at once. And it's just, what we're talking about right now is just what's happening in the US next year. But at the end of February, AT&T will start to, sunset their 3G network. In April, you're going to have T-Mobile and Sprint start to sunset their network. And then in December of next year, Verizon is going to start this. And as I said, it will happen. It won't happen all at once in the US, but they're going to, it will start. That's when they're going to start their process, and you'll see it in different pockets in the country.
Once a cellular carrier shuts down the network for part of the country you're working in, those devices on 3G will no longer be able to transmit data, whether it's an ELD or other telematic device. But before we hear from Michael, let's hear from 1044 sponsor Chevron Lubricants. Did you know that 90% of the ash and soot trapped inside your DPF right now is caused by your engine oil? It's not like you can go without engine oil, so there's nothing you can do about it, right? Wrong. Chevron spent a decade developing a no-compromise formulation when it comes to minimizing ash output and maximizing engine protection. Delos 600 ADF with OmniMax technology is an ultra-low ash diesel engine oil that is specifically designed to combat DPF ash clogging by cutting sulfate ash by 60% and extending DPF service life by 2.5 times. Delos 600 ADF also enables extended drain intervals thanks to an advanced antioxidant technology that prevents oil breakdown even at the high temperatures found in modern diesel engines. And by slashing the number of regens, Delos 600 ADF with OmniMax technology comes with a 3% fuel efficiency increase throughout the DPF's lifetime. If you're keeping score at home, that's decreased downtime, extended maintenance intervals, and improved fuel economy. That's real money in your pocket and time saved. Before you had to choose between protecting your engine or your after-treatment system, but now you don't. Delos 600 ADF with OmniMax technology. It's time to kick some ash.
If you have a 3G device, the connectivity, the moment they shut down the network, it's like a light switch. It just, it stops working. the device will still capture information. That won't stop working. But what will stop is the ability to transmit that data, right, over the cellular network to the telematics company, who then uses that and puts it in the application that fleet users use, right? So anybody that has become dependent on telematics in any way, shape, or form to doing their commercial business, this is a major impact that's gonna affect them next year.
While the telematics providers themselves can tell how many of their devices are still on 3G, it's difficult to say how many devices across trucking are in danger of being phased out next year. If a fleet doesn't know what network its devices are operating on, contacting the device provider is a good first step.
There is no real way to know exactly how not in a sort of aggregate way, right? Each of the telematics companies probably have visibility into this in terms of their devices that are out there. But in terms of like a collective, how many does this affect? We don't really know. I would say it's probably a lot. It's probably more than you might think. For a fleet user, unfortunately, there's no way. You can't, it's like looking at your cell phone. There's no way to just look at your cell phone and know, hey, is this a 3G or a 4G or a 5G device? You can't really tell. What you'd have to do is you have to go to the manufacturer and find out. So in this case, you don't have to go to the manufacturer, but you'd have to talk to your telematics company, right? Whoever you're buying telematics from, you have to talk to them and find out, hey, what device is in my equipment or vehicle. And if it's 3G, what I would then say is they should be asking the telematics companies, hey, what's your plan? And how do I fit into that?
With the 3G phase out starting in just a few short months, one big problem fleets might run into is a shortage of 4G and newer devices, because the computer chip shortage is putting a strain on telematics production, just like every other piece of electronics.
Here's the issue. There's a perfect storm brewing, right? And what we've got is, on one hand, right, we've got this massive supply chain shortage on the components. So what that means is, the telematics device has a bunch of, it has like a motherboard in there. It's got chipsets in there. It's got different components that is used to create the telematics device that allows it to work. Well, there's a massive component shortage in the industry today, and that is expected to go well into the end of next year, if not potentially the following year, right? So what that means is they can't manufacture new 4G or 5G devices because they can't get their hands on the chipsets, right? So you're kind of looking at then being able to replace 3G devices with 4G at a minimum devices with what's in the existing inventory for the most part, in terms of what's out there. So if the telematics companies are running into problems and basically acquiring the devices that they need, you as a fleet user need to know that now, because as I said, it's gonna shut down next year at some point, and that might happen in wherever you're located geographically in the U.S. That might happen to you prior to your telematics company being able to supply a replacement. You should ask now from your TSP, from the telematics company, hey, what's your plan? How do I fit into that plan? What's your stock in terms of inventory? And you should be taking like action to get this rectified sooner rather than later. And frankly, if what you're hearing from that telematics company, your current company, doesn't suffice for you, like it doesn't, you don't feel a sense of comfort that this is going to be okay, you might want to look elsewhere too, because this is some companies have planned better than others, right? In terms of foreseeing the shortage and buying up the chipsets in advance and making sure that they have what they need. Like we have done that, for example. We're good all the way through the end of next year, based on our supply chain management for ourselves, because we're a manufacturer of the product. Again, you can't come to us to buy, but you can come to us and we'll tell you which telematics companies have inventory. Like we could do that also, because we have visibility into, like over 40 different telematics companies that we work with. Again, we're not going to show favoritism one way or the other, and we won't make recommendations, but we will be able to at least tell you which ones have the availability in terms of inventory and resources. But you've got to make that call, and you should take that on as a fleet user. You should take this onus on yourself to do this. I know you don't want to have to, and it's another thing to have to worry about it, at the end of the year, which on top of everything else, it's like the last thing you want to have to be dealing with. But it's not necessarily in the telematics company's best interest especially if they don't have supply. It's not in their best interest to come to you directly, proactively, because they're going to have to tell you that they don't have something for you. So it's important that you take the onus yourself on this one.
Michael noted that some telematics providers are ahead of the curve and have been in contact with their fleet customers in the last year or two to upgrade older devices, but there are still some companies that haven't. He also said that even if a fleet gets a new device, it may need to be professionally installed, which could result in some scheduling difficulties.
I mean, this has been a problem that they've had eyes on for a couple of years now. So they knew this was coming. Some have done a really nice job, but others have not. And the reality is that I would say the majority, whether they're doing a nice job or not, the majority are experiencing supply shortages, right? So even if they've done a great job managing the process, they still just, because you can't control what's happened, they still might be out, right? And might not have the supply that customers need in the time that they need it. Again, you've got this component shortage happening. That's one part of this storm. You've got another part of the storm brewing, which is this impending timeline that is coming up very, very quickly. You have this third element of the storm, which is that we are all human. Human nature is, in many ways, is to wait till the last minute for things, especially when it requires making changes in your fleet. And these kinds of swap outs, at least for the telematics devices, it's probably going to require an installation guy or person coming out which means you have to pull your vehicle out of service, and you have to coordinate that. If you're a big fleet, this is a lot of work, right, to do. And there's a lot of downtime, and there's an impact to the business as well, which is, if you're in logistics, is like the last thing you want to be doing right now is slowing down your business at all, because you have way more demand than you have supply to fulfill anyways. But you're not going to have a choice. And so, there's a lot of heartache, that comes into the play. But if you wait, the problem that you could face is there won't be, like, all the inventory will be taken in terms of what's available today. And so then you're out of luck. And even then, if you wait and by chance you end up getting access to the inventory, now what you're going to have, though, is a backlog of installers, right? And I don't know if you remember when ELD came into play, this is exactly what happened, right? And so basically, you had all these telematics companies that were pushing product out. They had everything you needed, but the installation network that's used, across the country is small compared to the number of vehicles that are out there. And, these installations take time. So you figure if you have, somebody who's going to spend 30 minutes to 45 minutes on your vehicle, swapping things out, getting the installers to come out, you're competing with every other commercial fleet out there, right? So, so then there's that aspect of it. And then on top of it, there's inflation, which means prices of everything are going up, especially when you have, the shortages, because now you've got supply and demand, economics taking into effect here and playing a role. So there literally is like a massive perfect storm brewing, which is why you've got to act now.
With the perfect storm of events that Michael mentioned, with the supply chain and device shortages, fleets should act as soon as possible to make sure their devices are going to continue working once the 3G networks are starting to wind down.
The biggest thing right now is that they need to first identify, the extent of their fleet or vehicles that are going to be affected. Most cases, people don't have their entire fleet outfitted all at once, all at the same time, and things have changed. And, if a telematics company knew that one of their fleets was a 3G device fleet, and they had to make a repair or they had to swap out a product or something like that, in general, they were using a 4G product to do that because they knew this was coming, right? So your entire fleet might not be affected or impacted. It might also, but it might not. But either way, you have to figure that out. So like step one is you got to contact your telematics company, whoever you're using, and get an assessment of how impactful is this going to be. You may find out that all of your devices are 4G, and you're like, don't have to worry, one less thing on my list. Or you could find out quite the opposite, that your whole fleet is 3G. And you know what? Better to know that now than not, right? And then once you have that knowledge, then you can start to figure out what's your solution, right? And how you're going to solve for this. What I can say is I wouldn't bank on the fact that anything is going to change with, sort of timing of regulations or the timing of the shutdown. And you still have all the problems in terms of supply chain shortage, and component shortages and all that. None of that is likely going to change. It's going to continue down the path that it's headed now. So you can only really focus on the things that you have control over. And at this point, what that really comes down to is, if you have the problem, you might have to look for another telematics provider, which I know is not the greatest thing, especially because all the problems that come with switching and having to learn a new system, and right, it's a lot of heartache on top of heartache. I get that, but if you're not getting an adequate response from your current telematics provider, and you're highly dependent on the telematics data, there's going to be a problem for you.
With AT&T's 3G sunsetting beginning in February, but Verizon's not starting until December, it's unfortunate for fleets that, unlike with your cell phone that you could take and switch to another cell provider, telematics devices aren't that simple.
The chipsets within the devices, the cellular modems that are there, are certified to run on specific networks. So, and what that means is through a certification process, and this is not something that you just submit for. There's a lot of testing. It takes months to certify devices on particular networks, and it's hard to do. And there's a reason for that, because the networks need to make sure that if a device is using it, it's going to work, right? That's the point. Because if it doesn't, you don't blame the device, you blame the network, right? And so, the networks are very strict on this, as they should be, and they want to make sure that they're only certifying devices that can work on their network. And it's more than just a SIM card, right? So if you go to say, oh, I'm just going to put a Verizon SIM card in my device that had an AT&T SIM card, it's likely not going to work, because the SIM card is not the thing that certifies it on the network that makes it usable. It's the cellular modem and the chipset within the device itself that's certified to work on certain networks. So no, you can't just take it and just move it the way you would, like an iPhone or something. Unfortunately, well, actually, I should say, fortunately not. Actually, it's not an unfortunate. It's fortunate, because we rely so heavily. Think about it. We rely so heavily on the quality of the networks and our devices that are worked on. If the networks allowed something like that to happen, it would mean that the quality would suffer dramatically, because you'd have all these devices at certain points that would just stop working, right? So, thank goodness the networks are so strict about this, so that we have confidence in this particular situation that we're in. It kind of sucks for the fleet user, right? I get it, but it's for the betterment of everybody that the system is what it is.
That's it for this week's 1044. You can read more on ccjdigital.com, and as always, you can find the 1044 each week on CCJ's YouTube channel. And if you've got questions, comments, criticisms, or feedback, please hit us up at 1044trucking@gmail.com or give us a call, 404-491-1380. Until next week, everybody stay safe.